quality improvement sessions, which Nick has kindly agreed to do for us across across all of the community service teams, actually. And this is to support a gap that was identified during our sort of look into what training and development needs people wanted. So thank you very much, Nick. I'll hand over to you. And this first session is around improvement principles, and it will be recorded so we can listen again. And people who can't attend can have a listen. But I think we're going to have the opportunity for questions and answers for those people that are live on the Teams call now. So thanks, and over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Gemma. Yeah, welcome everybody. Let me just make sure that my screen is live. There you go. So, but yeah, thanks for inviting me. As Gemma just said, a canter through some improvement principles that I guess I've kind of picked up over the years. So, quick introduction. Yeah, first of 3 sessions. So hopefully you'll be able to join the other 2 as well. Mentioned I'm Nick Holding. I'm head of improvement for the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team. So part of operational improvement within the Q Directorate in NHS England. Background in, I've been in ESIS for 7 years. Previous to that, I spent 15 years in an acute trust in the Midlands, developing, introducing improvement methodologies. And I've just been one of those typical improvement geeks over the years, organisational psychologist. So I really like to understand the psychology and the human element of change, which I'll bring into some of the bit today, but more so in future sessions. But I suppose I just wanted to start really by this is a subject I'm really passionate about, I guess, and I really like to get into the detail. I am that, as I said, that geek, but it's not the gospel according to Nick Holding. This is very much if you have some thoughts, please pop them in the chat. We'll pick up some questions afterwards. There'll be some things you may agree with, some things you don't agree with. This is just my thoughts, and I always sort of sense that everyone has their own special talents, as Einstein talks about. I've just picked up a bit of stuff over the years that I hopefully will be useful, and you might find relevant to either your world in your own work, but also people you engage with. As a result of your work, you may find some of these things useful. So my starting position is often, I talked about think like a farmer, how do we prepare the soil? And often we find ourselves trying to introduce change and improvement in an environment that isn't necessarily conducive to change. And it's about sometimes how we look at the environment first before we try and introduce this high quality, whatever it might be, fully researched, well tested change in an environment where actually the ground is pretty barren, and it's about how we can start to introduce and try things out that actually help to change that a little bit before we start some of the work. And the goal talks about here, and I think we can all recognise this, that any improvement is a change, but not every change is an improvement. And we've all seen change in our world, and whether it's in our work currently or in previous roles, we'll have all been involved in some kind of change, but has it necessarily led to an improvement? And that's the difference. Not all change leads to improvement, but we have to understand change in itself before we can even get to an improvement. And so there's a fascinating study, and I talk about this quite often because it's core to what some of the conversations around improvement exist around. And there's a study, it was originally done back in the 80s, but it's been replicated several times. And this was a study that suggested that it was done by McKinsey, 3,000 or more representation. It was suggested that around 70% of change efforts fail or don't achieve any degree of their objectives. So a real high proportion of change. So we're all involved in change a lot, and a lot of our work is involved in change. I know from my own work, I'm pretty much all I'm involved with. And you look at this and you go, oh, yeah, that's 70% of all the efforts that we put in around change. And particularly when I was back in the Q Trust, and you look at this, 70% don't meet the objectives that we originally set out and we planned for. But again, more startling to that, only a further 25% only achieve some of their objectives, which leave just to 5% that actually lead to a sustained change and improvement. And we have so much going on in this space. There's so much change, so much improvement. There's so many people involved in improvement across the NHS. And when you start to break this down, you think only 5% of that is actually leading to a sustainable change or improvement. When you start to look into some of the reasons behind that, what some of the findings found, it was as some of the things described here, and you can pick up some of the things you want. But I want to pick out a few. I think those unrealistic expectations at the outset. Are we really clear about what we want to try and achieve here? Can we do this in the agreed timescales? Often we find ourselves that we engage in some improvement work and we think it's going to be sorted in 3 or 6 months. That's what the customer using that language wants a delivery of this within 3 or 6 months. Well, possibly unrealistic based on the degree of the or the scale of the work. What's in it for me? Poor communications. What's the individual's role in it? The time commitment required. But what I want to touch on today is it's the improvement mechanisms, how we go about improvement in the first place. It often leads to the sustainable change or improvement. And by contrast, it's the improvement mechanism and the way we go about things that result in over 70% leading to failure in terms of the delivery. So we got to stop and think for a moment. And then I am ill here. How many of you are familiar with Winnie the Pooh? Uh, first chapter, virtually the first page, he talks about, here comes Edward Baird now down the stairs behind Christopher Robin, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. He's sure there must be a better way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment to think about it. And I find that there are a lot of people in this environment where they just don't have the chance to stop and think for a moment. Is there a better way of doing this? We're on the treadmill, hamster wheel, whatever analogy you want to use, and we're in that kind of busy mindset. And we just don't get a chance to stop and think for a moment. But we have to go back and think. Isn't it time to do something different? Is our improvement approach, is the way that we do things having an impact on the way that we deliver change? And we find that we're often really good at the planning stage and often really good at getting things lined up in terms of writing a plan, understanding what our aims are, understanding direction of travel. And then at the point when of introducing something or introducing change or leading that improvement, we then seem to assume, and I see this with lots of people across systems, assume because we've done the planning that for some miracle that it'll just happen, and we don't necessarily always try to go back and understand what's the environment like. So this may or may not relate to some of the work that you're involved in. It may or may not relate to your own work. These are some of the things that exist in terms of some of those core improvement principles. And when we start getting some of the human behavior elements, trying to understand why doesn't this happen, when we understand what we're all trying to achieve and we're all lined up and we all understand what we need to do, what is that gap between the knowing and then the doing? And this comes into place so often. And I come back to this slide and this kind of conversation. I was in an ED last week, and I was talking to the teams and I was talking to the leaders, and they were really clear about what they needed to do. And I got a sense they've probably known this for a long time, but it's that shift into the doing that we couldn't quite get under the surface of what's the barrier, what's stopping them. And I think there are a lot of things there, and we can sort of dig into that a little bit. But it's this leap into the doing, and that shift from all the planning. And we can be really good at that, and we can write the policy, and we can write the SOPs, and we can have an agreement. But then moving into the doing is such a difficult space. I don't think we often pay enough attention to that bit, and that's from my own personal experience. I've learned over the years that I don't pay enough attention to that particular bit. I probably spent more in terms of getting people to a place that we understand and agree what we need to do, and then for some reason think that that's going to just lead to a change. So lots of quotes around this, and you can take some of these and use them in your own conversations if you want. But if we always do what we've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And importantly, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. It's not by accident that things either fail or they succeed. So the first, I suppose, one of the first principles I often go with when I talk to teams about this is it's really important that we take our time, and that's not always a gift that we have available to us. But that idea that we haven't got time for this, we haven't got time to improve the environment, we haven't got time to understand what the needs are, we haven't got time to set the scene. And I more recently, I mean, on a personal level, across the last few months, across winter in the UEC space that I exist in, that has just felt even more apparent. We just don't have time. We are up against the operational pressures. We just need to do some stuff. And we can't just do some stuff. There are some simple things, but if you want long-term sustainable change, this is not something you can rush. And we find ourselves, when you're going back to that an original analogy that I put up on the screen, we have to start thinking like, how do we create the environment to allow this change we want to introduce the best opportunity to grow. I was talking about this when I joined some of you in person. There's quite a famous rose grower locally to me in Shropshire called David Austin, and their roses are about 50, £60 for a rose. I mean, for me, I'm not a fantastic gardener. That's an investment in terms of a decent rose. I'm not going to take that amazing 50 or £60 rose and take it to my back garden and just stick it in a bit of barren soil and just not bother to water it or not bother to fertilize it. I'm going to dig the hole. I'm going to create a space. I'm going to water it. I'm going to put some nourishment into the soil before I actually then plant the rose to give it its best opportunity. So it's this time that we spend before we introduce change and lead to improvement. The quote from here, Lincoln, and there's plenty others like this. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening an axe. Many examples across this about many different industries where they've taken more time in terms of the preparation and the understanding and the providing the right environment, and then being able to introduce the change, rather than trying to rush the initial bit and then ending up having to do lots of rework and follow up and chasing to actually lead to the change itself. The other thing about the rushed element and introducing something very quickly, or not doing the due diligence around what we need to do and how we create the right environment, is that we can set off in the wrong direction. Stephen Covey here talks about, if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us in the wrong place faster. And I've seen that so many times where we're just in the mindset where we just need to do something. We just need to get on with it and do something, but we don't realize that actually we're heading in the wrong direction. If we just took our time for a moment, we could have understand the situation a bit better, understand what the environment looks like, and that may be around culture, it may be around leadership, it may be around understanding the current state properly through decent data analysis. If we just took our time a little bit more, we'd have understood that it's best to go in that direction rather than that direction. Take a sip of water. So one of the other principles that I think this is a learning that I got over the years, is around a sense of reality for myself around improvement and my own expectations of myself, and then of other people. We often start from a position of, we've got a starting point, we know we want to get to, and that's the end point. But the reality is often something very different, and it's something we don't, in terms of planning and understanding the process, it's not as linear as we might think. We can set a starting point and we might know the end point, but in between there are pitfalls, there are successes, there's slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, there's all sorts of things that happen in between those 2 points. And the reality is that change and improvement is challenging, it's unpredictable, and there's a degree of ambiguity. And we have to get really comfortable with that sense of ambiguity and learning to, how do we adapt and how do we roll with some of those punches, but also to realize and identify and pick up on unexpected successes, because that typical trajectory that we often think, and I've been involved in many environments where I've been asked to create a trajectory for a particular improvement, and it is literally as much of a waste of time as just drawing a line and say, there you go, there's your trajectory, because that's as much as you can predict it. But the reality is that you can do lots of stuff, but it may not feel like progress. All the development, all the preparation, that nourishing of the environment and the soil before something happens, and we still get to the end result. So the start bit may not feel like we're getting anywhere, but it's starting to appreciate the value in that, the importance of that bit before we even get started, as we talked about before with the sharpening of the sword. It's really important at this stage, though, that we know where we're heading. To enable that early work to happen, we really need to understand the direction of travel. And I want to just reflect a bit that on a bit that now. I was probably, over the years, I've learned that it's not necessarily always about the methodology, but how do we can create a clear narrative around our direction of travel, and what is it, the direction, what is it we're trying to achieve, as Kobe talked about. Begin with the end in mind. Where are we heading? It doesn't matter how far away that may feel. It may feel like it's a long way in the distance, but at least we understand the direction. It could be in easy reach, but at least we understand what direction we're going in. And this is the kind of, as we build our own improvement routine, our own improvement habit, we start to play this process and this structure through in our minds on a more regular basis. And this is one that I picked up on a few years ago, and it has really been so useful for me in just holding this one as a place in my mind where I keep on coming back to on a regular basis. And this improvement routine, habit, whatever you want to call it, it's about being really clear. That first step is, how do we set the direction? What's the current challenge? Where are we trying to go? What we're trying to achieve? That is so important in improvement. Shared purpose, whatever phraseology you choose to use, but that really clear sense of direction. Then you come back to number two, grasp the current condition. What's the environment like? What's the current state for this particular process or piece of work, or whatever it is that you're involved in? Really, truly understand it, grasp the current condition. And this was the light bulb moment for me. Not that we then start to work towards number one, but that we set what's our next target condition. What's the next thing we want to do? Establish that point in time in the future that we won't deliver the entirety of the piece of work, but what's the next thing we want to do to lead us and to move forward to ultimately achieve the ultimate aim. And this bit here really helps us to break things down a little bit. And in between 2 and 3, what you then start to do is you conduct some of your tests, and the experiments and the trying things out happens in that space, rather than trying things out between 2 and 1, which feels big and sometimes unrealistic. And to help us with that, there are a couple of I don't really talk about tools that much. The improvement space can get quite overloaded, saturated by different tools, and everybody's got their own favorite and everybody's got their own approach. It's not about the tools. Improvement is 20% technical, 80% human. We can use tools when we need to, but it shouldn't be the only thing that we use. So I'm always cautious around tools. But the one that I think for me sits at the heart of a lot of the things that we do, even if it's just philosophically, you may just keep the model for improvement in your mind, is this particular structure. So be really clear about the aim, as we talked about there, COVI. Begin with the end in mind. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to achieve here? What's the change we're trying to make? How we know that change is an improvement? Going back to the Goldratt stuff, all change requires it. Not all change is an improvement. So how do we know it's an improvement? What's the measurement? What's the data tell us? How do we understand that we're making a difference? And then what changes can we make that will result in the improvement? What are the tests? What are the experiments? What are we going to do? What are the small things that will lead to that particular change? And then we move through this PDSA, this plan, do, study, act cycle that many of you will be familiar with. But this genuinely true aspect of planning for the change, introducing a change, studying it, and then responding to what we've learned as a result of that study. And that model really sits in that experimentation space as we go between 2 and 3, where we've started to understand what our current state is and what we want to achieve next. We're really in that space where we try lots of things out, and some things will fail. It's been really comfortable with some of the things that we try don't always work first time. And there's a model here that I often quite enjoy using, which is linked to the model for improvement. This is when we get into the study space, where we start to look at what is working, what isn't working, what do we need to change, what do we need to do more of, what do we need to keep doing more of, what do we need to stop, what do we need to start doing. We're in that kind of review, reflective space now, where we're starting to use this kind of structure, where we're genuinely learning, and we're learning from the changes that we're making in true experimentation. Nothing is fixed until we've proved it. And but what we find often, and this is again past experience, we talk about the PDSA cycles, and it's often turned into a thing in itself. We're going to do a PDSA, or we're going to do a PDSA on that, or we're going actually there's not really a relevant enough understanding of the different factors, because what we find is that we're really great at the planning, do a lot of that. We even get into doing some of the doing sometimes, but we're not great at the study bit. And this is the secret sauce for me around improvement, is that bit that we've done something and we've learned from it, and have we made a difference? And in this space there, where there's a busyness and an immediacy and a rush to get things done, this is the bit that often gets missed. And that allows us to respond differently. What have we learned? Is the ladder up against the right wall, using COVID analogy? Are we heading in the right direction? And then when we've done that, you may want to use a tool like the ABC tool here, which is accelerate, break, create. It describes a long-term aim, and it shows the 30 and 60 and 90 days after the first introduction of the aim. What is it we can do more of? What is it we should be stopping? And what should we be doing differently or in addition to? So these are simple tools that linking to the model for improvement, the plan, do, study, act cycle, which you may find useful. And I can share a template for this if you might find it useful. And then the reality check for others, how we work with other people. So we can, a lot of that self-reflection about understanding our own methods and our own process, but then how do we inspire other people? How do we give other people that sense of purpose, and how do we influence them in terms of their work? And I'll touch on this a lot more when we talk about this in terms of the psychology of improvement and around the culture in some of the other sessions. But this quote from David Marquet, and it's a brilliant one of the couple of brilliant books that I highly recommend. Ex commander, I think he was, in the US Navy submarine commander. He said, if you want people to think, give them intent, not instruction. So we give people intent, a sense of purpose, what we're trying to achieve here. Tell people what to do, they'll do it in a very short-term manner, but it's not necessarily sustainable. So how we create that sense of vision, that sense of purpose, where we're trying to head, what we're trying to achieve. If we just give people instruction, we're not giving them that inspiration to want to change. And this is quite an old document now, the Managing the Human Dimensions of Change, but still stands up for me. This is a few lines from it, which I'll just sort of leave with you, in the fact that people are not machines. You cannot make others do as they're told, nor can you be everywhere at once to watch others to ensure compliance. I know when I spoke to you last time, one of the privileges I have is that we're a big enough team that I can go all over the country, and I can actually get into organisations and be with people as we lead change. And I can spend maybe a couple of months with them, and you may not always have that opportunity to do that. So it's how we can try and do that on a sort of more distant basis. But you can't be everywhere, as we just described. You can't be there to watch to ensure compliance. Really strongly believe this. Command and control systems cannot work in a human intensive system like health and social care. Health and social care is such a human intensive system. We want people to contribute. We want people to bring their whole selves to work, and that includes their brain in terms of their thoughts and their contribution, whatever level of the organisation they exist at. None of us would be willing to put up with that kind of approach if we worked in that way. So it's that, how can we break free from this, the command and control structure? And I know that I find that pervasive across most healthcare organisations, where there is a strong command and control structure, but how do we inspire? How do we create the environment? How do we set the scene? How do we first of all give people that's the kind of intent that David Marquet talks about? And I will touch on a bit more on the human behaviour and some of the behavioural change models in some future sessions. But there's one here that I wanted to share with you in terms of some of the improvement principles that I think is important to capture in this space, because I think it does set the scene in terms of how we approach improvement. Some of this, how we create the right environment, how we nourish the soil, goes back to that thinking like a farmer. And I think this one for me is probably as close to that in terms of what we can genuinely do. And it's the fancy name, that trans-theoretical model of behaviour change, loosely called the stages of change model, predominantly used previously in public health around behaviour change, smoking cessation, dietary changes, exercise, that sort of thing, but has become more and more relevant in change and improvement in general. So Prochaska, De Clemente and Norcross suggest within their research, and this has been replicated many times since, that everybody exists in this pre-contemplative state before a change exists. And I'm sure in your mind now, you're thinking of a change that you may have been involved in your personal life. You may have been one of those people. I mean, I did. I trying to give up smoking for years, changing our behaviours, introducing exercise, whatever it might be, going to the gym more, whatever it is that you want to do. We're always in that pre-contemplative state where we don't believe there's a need for change. We don't see it, we don't understand it, we haven't had our eyes opened for whatever reason. We haven't understood the data. Then for whatever reason, we've been persuaded, we've been motivated by some kind of either inspirational person or some data or some research or whatever it might be. And then we're in that kind of contemplative, we're thinking about this change. Then we move through into preparation. We think, yeah, we want to do this, we want to make this change, and then we start to move through into preparation and then action and then maintain that change. Some people can move through this really quickly in minutes and hours. You know, they can move through not seeing the need for change, see some data, see a really powerful presentation, get it, and then we move into action. But what the research suggests here is that what we often ask people to do is to move from 1 to 4 immediately without going through the other stages. And everybody has to go through those stages of change to get to action and maintenance. As I said, some people will move through it quicker, other people may go a lot slower, and it could take weeks or months for them to come through that journey. But everybody does have to go through those changes. So for me, it's the bit between 1 and 2. How do we provide that really clear inspiration and really clear narrative around the need for change that allows people to move from not really seeing the need for change to into how do we start to think about what that change might be without going from 1 to 4. And that really does relate to the kind of people, the person that we are. And this usual bell curve of distribution exists across most research, and it sits in the kind of innovation space as well, in the across any degree of population, within this group, within this meeting today, within my team, within your teams, with the people we work with. These percentages at the bottom have been proven to exist in most population groups. So that suggests that 2.5% of people will be innovators. These are the people that just want to get involved in anything. They'll be enthusiastic, they'll want to change. And I think we can all, in our mind's eye, we've got people in our mind who exist like that. They're just up for anything. They're in the queue for the brand new iPhone when it first comes out or whatever. They just want to be first. Then we've got those early adopters, and I think this is the space that I sit in. I'm definitely not an innovator. I'm one of those first followers. Put somebody in front of me that is inspirational and creative, and I'm right behind them quite quickly. But I'm definitely not in that kind of innovation space. So there's early adopters, about 13.5% of any kind of population group sits in that. Then you've got the early majority, the late majority, and then what is often described as the laggards. Not a great fan of the word, prefer skeptics. These are those people that will just check this stupid crazy ideas that the innovators are coming up with to see if it really is a brilliant idea or if it's just another harebrained scheme that they've got. So the reason why I don't like laggards is it suggests negative. I think skeptics are brilliant. Those those eeyores to the tigers, those ones that say, "Are you sure? Just better double check." Those are people that are really important to me. What this research suggests is that in between the early adopters and the early majority, there's quite a gap. Those are the early majority are just looking for the early adopters and the innovators to go first and to prove they're interested, they're looking over the fence, they're curious, but they're not quite ready yet to dip their toe in the water and really go for it. But when you get the early majority on board, most of the early majority, then you start to get a tipping point, and the late majority and the skeptics start to come on board. The old thinking was often that we start with the laggards or the difficult people and everybody else will follow. Generally not the case. We find now that you waste a lot of effort in trying to persuade people who probably don't want to move as quickly as other people. But we can create a tipping point by engaging. What I find is that the innovators are going to do it anyway. The early adopters are going to be there with you. It's the early majority, those people that you can engage with and start to look around and think, who are the early majority here that are curious, interested, and they're the kind of people that will start to change, make a change, and influence and introduce these shifts for you. But it's really important that we understand, again, going back to this model here, we understand different perspectives and really put ourselves in the shoes of other people for a bit, because we just don't know whether we're both talking the same language. I find myself in that situation so often where a few weeks or months down the line just realize that we've been speaking a slightly different language because from the different perspectives that we find ourselves in. So it's worth having that, how we start to understand the others and the reality for others, and that what's their environment like, what's the situation they find themselves. Do we all understand each other in terms of the same language? And then the last bit for me around some principles is that learning from failure. I touched on it before about this kind of study and the acting and what's going right and what's not necessarily going right. Really embracing the idea that this is so difficult to do this, learn from failure and embrace it and see there will always be something in something that went wrong that will help us in the future. It's not necessarily about writing it off, as Henry Ford mentions here. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. It's very difficult in intensive environments like healthcare to accept this, and this takes a bit of high levels of psychological safety for a start. So if people don't work in a psychologically safe environment, it's very difficult for them to accept a degree of failure. But starting to coach and get people into the space that we won't get it right first time, we won't always be there, we won't always necessarily achieve what we said we were going to achieve, but how do we go back? How do we reflect and go back and look at what did work well, what didn't work well, why didn't it work well? And sometimes we hear this a lot. Oh, we've done that before and it didn't work. As if that was we're always going to write it off, then are we? There may be something in that. Why didn't it work? Do we understand were the bits that did work? And going back to that knowing and doing gap, this is one of those key bits. That fear of failure really does sit at the heart of them. We know what we need to do, but we can't seem to break into the doing because of that fear of failure. So as people involved in change and improvement, how do we support people? How do we create the right support network or structure that allows people to take some of those risks, to try those experiments, to learn from failure? Because sometimes it does feel like we're in that we just need to take that leap of faith. We understand where we are now, we understand where we want to get to, but it really is that leap of faith that sometimes we're asking people to go on. And that's the persuasive argument. That's the stages of change model that we're hoping people will go on a bit of that journey with us. So wrapping up, and we'll have time for questions if anybody's got any thoughts around anything, or just want to ask me some questions. I'll just leave them with this one, as this model as well. This is Kotter's 8-step model. I think one of a few those improvement principles, not necessarily a tool, but just something to think about. And again, one of those ones that I go back to regularly. Quite old now, this one, but again, still stands up. What we've just spoken about there, all that all the content we've just been through kind of relates mostly to some of this model here. And we talk about how we create the right environment for change, increase that sense of urgency, knowing where we're heading, what's the sense of direction, build that guiding team. Who are you innovators? Who are your early adopters? Who are the early majority? Get the vision right. When we talk about that improvement habit, be clear about where we want to get to, where are we now, what's the next thing we want to do in terms of that structure. Get the vision right for the work. Communicate for buy-in, empower action, create short-term wins. These are the things that get things moving. It won't be zero to hero. It's not going to be we have something here and we're going to introduce it here. It's incrementally building up to we know we want to get to. We have a new thing, a new change, a new policy. We have a new structure or process we want to introduce, but we're not going to get there overnight. And then the point there is about because we've done the earlier work, we're in the sustainable change environment where we don't let up, we make it stick, we follow through. People feel engaged and connected to the work, so there's higher likely to be sustained and introduced. But it's really important that we understand that it's, as I said, it's not an overnight success thing. Those journeys take a long time, and it starts with a single step. And sometimes that single step is just understanding some of the improvement principles that exist and some of the environment. Is it the barren soil that we saw on one of the early slides, or is it a lovely lush meadow that is ready for the next change to be introduced? And how do we create that inspiration in people to break free from this structure of just doing as they're told, that they have got the ability to try things out, give something a go, try something different. And that is often quite difficult. And us in our spaces can create the right environment for that to happen. And that thing about asking for forgiveness rather than permission, I think we probably all recognise this in terms of the environments, our working worlds, the jobs that we've done before. Sometimes about just taking that risk and then saying sorry afterwards if we've got it wrong or we haven't asked the right permissions. Comes back to that psychologically safe environment, and we touched on this when I met with some of you in person about how we, as individuals, do we always find ourselves in a psychologically safe environment? That the people we work with, are they operating in a psychologically safe environment? So last one for me, and then we'll take some questions. This famous quote, often misquoted, and this is the full quote: "It is not the most intelligent of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able to best adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself." And that goes back for me to being comfortable with ambiguity. Change doesn't exist in a linear way. There are dips and there are successes and there are unexpected activities, and those that survive are able to adapt to that kind of environment. So if we think about this as in terms of our improvement principles, it's the adaptability of the change and the improvement itself. So I always like to leave you with a few each session I'll just leave you with a few references. So just if you do want to go back and do a bit more reading, some books that I've referenced today, and I'll do this throughout the sessions. Eli Goldratt, John Cotter, and 2 books by David Marquet I would highly recommend if you want a bit of additional reading about some of the things that we've talked about today. But for now, thank you for listening. I'll put my email address on the bottom there if you want to drop me an email or talk more about this, or please let me know. More than happy to do that. But I think we've got some time for questions. If so I see the chat is. Just check the chat. I'm going to hand back over to you, Gemma, while I open up the chat. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you so much for that, Nick. It's really interesting, and I think there's some really interesting things to think about when we're trying to look at how we make improvements and changes. And I think I've put in the chat, actually, I'm doing the Rosalind Franklin programme, and it's a lot about reflecting on your practice and how things have improved, or mistakes that have happened, and what you might do to get over that in the future, and what changes you might make to not make that mistake again. And I think I've taken from this and the Rosalind Franklin programme, you need to make sure that sort of building your tribe, I suppose, and making sure that everybody's on board with what changes you want to make, and any using the diversity of the team really to support any sort of changes or improvements or quality improvements or whatever it is, and making sure that you use everyone's views and opinions to build that change and design it and then implement it. And I think by doing that, you, like as you've said, Nick, you're much more likely to actually make that change happen, and for it to be more sustainable, and be able to use everyone's views and opinions to make it the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely agree. I think that we all fall 20 odd years later, I've still fallen into this trap of not doing exactly that. So to having the ability just to check in with yourself occasionally, just to say, just remind yourself that this is not something that sticks in our mind permanently, because we can get sucked into we just got to get on and do some stuff. And I'm doing it all. I find myself doing it all the time, and you forget the wisdom of the crowd, and you forget how do you create the right environment first. So it's, as I said at the start, just I am no expert in this. I've picked up some stuff along the way, and I still find myself falling into the trap of missing the things that exactly you've touched on.
Thank you. I was going to say something else then, and I can't remember what it was. It'll come back to me. Adu, you come in well, I think.
Thanks very much, Nick, for coming along. It's always really engaging and instructive, and thanks, Vicky, for organising it. I wondered if there were any sources or references you could suggest, maybe now or later, that collates or compiled some practical examples of PDSA cycles and a range of healthcare quality improvements in healthcare settings that can help to amplify the examples, almost like a primer to help us think in practical terms of how to use this.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's I'll put it in I have to dig it out. There was an interpretation of Eli Goldratt's book that I mentioned on the screen there, just for healthcare, and I can't remember what it was called now. It's I'll dig it out. It's somewhere on a bookshelf over there, which is a great example of that kind of approach. Also, there were a couple of others which are very specific to healthcare. I spent 3 years working with the Virginia Mason Institute in Seattle, and there's a lot of learning around that work where they've taken a whole organisation approach to improvement, using the kind of PDSA mindset. So I'll dig out some links around that, and I'll put them in the chat after we finish today, if that's okay.
Thanks, Nick. Fiona.
Thanks, Gemma. Thanks, Nick. It's been fascinating to hear you talk in detail. I just want to sort of make a comment about your very last slide, really, about the ambiguity. And I think, with the change process that we all went through last year, and sitting in new teams and all that change and ambiguity, it's, I suppose, how we build that resilience to withstand that ambiguity, because it's the only constant that we have. And I've worked in NHS England since 2017 now, and it's a really, in my opinion, it's a really challenging place to work, more challenging than anywhere I've worked previously. And I've been in the workplace, good 40 years now. And it needs that resilience. And how do we build that so that people can roll with that ambiguity and make the changes necessary, and the process is constant? Not expecting you to give me an answer. It's a rhetorical question, really.
No. Well, I don't think it is. To be fair, I think I think it's a really valid question. When did I join? 7 years ago, so 2018. We were in NHS Improvement at that point. Moved into NHS England, so there's been a state of flux, pretty much. So I totally get where you're coming from, and I think it is I think Gemma touched on it. It's the crowd, it's the wisdom, it's the tribe. When you find it, and again, there's a bit of the sort of psychology in this, but as human beings, we we were designed to operate in tribes, to survive in tribes. And when we find ourselves outside the tribe, we feel threatened, and we feel insecure, and we feel uncomfortable, and we're not as safe as we are within the tribe. And that still exists. We are still built the same as we were when we were roaming the plains of whatever. We still exist in that kind of space, and it's how we create when we're all going through similar. So we'll all have our own interpretations of the change, but we're all going something broadly similar. How do we create a genuinely supportive, and I don't just mean tokenistic supportive, a genuinely supportive environment that we all feel like we're collectively going through this change, and that it exists exactly the same. If I'm doing a bit of work within the emergency department of an organisation at the moment, and the whole team feels a little bit uncomfortable about some of the changes that they're going through, and there has to be a team sense of that uncomfortableness. People can't feel isolated in terms of that uncomfortableness. There's a sense that, look, we're all going through this, and there's a collective effort, but there's also collective support. And where I've seen good organisational change, or change that we've all been through as well, it's where the right environment has been created, the right structure, the right degree of acknowledgement that it's going to be a bit bumpy. We don't have all the answers. If we did have all the answers, we'd be lying to you. That kind of honesty and that openness. And sometimes in a big organisation, whether it's an NHS England size or whether it's an acute hospital size, some of that can get lost in the we're just going through a change. And it's as if we push a few buttons and pull a few levers, and we're not necessarily understanding the psychological impact on the individuals who may feel very uncomfortable. So, yeah, long answer to a good question probably is around the how does the leadership, in terms of where we exist, how do we create the right environment that people feel they're not on their own, so they feel part of a tribe.
I absolutely get that, so I'm not going to have a debate here, but there's also an element of personal responsibility as well for individuals, within that sort of tribe to, it's not just about leadership, is what I'm trying to say.
No,
there has to be some personal responsibility as well to do that.
There's personal responsibility. I absolutely get that. It's not just a one-way street, but to elicit that kind of personal responsibility, there is a responsibility to create the where that can exist, where people feel like they've got personal responsibility. It's understood what their personal responsibility is. It's made explicit what their personal responsibility is. Not and I've seen this happen too many times, is that there's an assumption that everything's going to be, you just do what you have to do. You tell us. There's a kind of victimhood to it, where this is being done to me. Somebody else is going to affect my life, but sometimes there's an empowerment, whatever that, there's a loosely termed word. How do we really give people those clear, and this goes to general change in general, in terms of be clear about what personal, go back to the McKinsey study. What's in it for me? What's my role in this change? What can I contribute? And that's as much about you as an individual member of the tribe. We have a responsibility to support each other as well, and that's our contribution to the change. So I absolutely get you. Yeah, it's there is contribution on all sides.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Did you remember, Gemma, or has it gone forever?
No, I remembered. So it was about always going back to what you're trying to achieve as well, because I think sometimes when you're trying to do something and you're looking at how it's working and making changes to the systems and processes and things like that, you can sometimes lose sight of actually what you're trying to achieve. And so I think it's quite important that you keep revisiting that and making sure that that's right and continues to be correct.
It gives us our sense of sense of direction, and I think you're right. There can be a tendency to lose a bit of patience and say, "Oh, this isn't working. We need to change direction or something." But it's the direction of travel. We've agreed this is what we're trying to achieve, and it may get a little bit bumpy on the way, but it just helps us to come back to. Can we just remind ourselves what it is we're trying to achieve? And it may not be the what. It may not be the what it is we're trying to do. It may be the why we're trying to do it. And those of you who are familiar with Simon Sinek's work, he talks about start with why. Why is this change? Because I don't know, in my world, patients are waiting on trolleys for over 12 hours in ED, as an example. Why are we introducing this change? Because there are significant waits for elective surgery or whatever it might be. It's not the what or even the how to a certain extent. It's the why. Keep on bringing us back to why are we doing this? Why is this important? And as you say, that kind of orientates us, keeps us focused on bringing us back to the central purpose. And once we've got that, or we've established that to start off with, and when we're able to bring people back, it takes away individual, or sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's priorities. It's kind of agnostic in terms of it's not an individual's idea or solution. It's just the vision we're trying to achieve, and you can kind of desensitize it by coming back to that when you've got lots of people with competing priorities and challenges and their own individual goals and objectives, which they're trying to introduce into this particular change. But just brings us back to, it's not me telling you what to do, it's not you telling me what to do. This is the vision, and it's a helpful kind of barometer that keeps us on track.
Yes, thank you. I've actually bought Simon Sinek's Start With Why book, so it's on my pile to be read.
Little taster there for you.
Taz, do you want to come in?
Yeah, hi Nick. Yeah,
Hi, Taz.
really useful. Lots and lots of information there in terms of techniques. I guess my question was more around how we align the change across the organization. I think you just touched on it, in terms of differing or conflicting priorities in different areas. I guess it's that picture. Have we got the ladder against the right wall? But have we got all the ladders lined up properly, and is everyone aligned to that? Because sometimes you're implementing change, but I know it's probably all about kind of leadership and having a clear strategy, but sometimes there's a little bit of conflicts of change because you're doing something in one area that the other area is running in a different direction. How do we make sure that alignment and it's all joined up across the organization rather than just in a kind of siloed
Yeah,
basis?
brilliant question, Taz. I think that is such a. I don't want to be a bit slopey shouldered on this one and deflect it, but it's an ongoing challenge, and I would say that that's one of the things that my ideal state would be that I work with an organisation that has an absolute clear sense of direction as a whole organisation. What I would say for that is that how do we first of all understand to what degree does that exist? So it is literally that. Is the organisation aligned behind its priorities, or isn't it? So at least we know there's going to be some disconnect. And then it's the circle of influence, circle of concern bit. So there is stuff that within the circle of influence that we probably can't affect the whole organisation in the work that we do. We'd love to, but sometimes we just can't. But where can we? What's our scope of influence? And sometimes we define organisations as one big organisation, but a division within an organisation can be an organisation, or a team, or a group of teams can be an organisation within an organisation, and it's looking at how can we affect that much without trying to boil the ocean about changing organisation. Just a sense of reality sometimes is a helpful kind of sense check. That the fact that we'd love it if this organisation was completely aligned, and we had a really helpful conversation with a new chief operating officer a few weeks ago, and obviously, you know, my focus is urgent and emergency care, and you know, we're having a conversation about that, and he said, you have to understand, Nick, that my concerns about urgent emergency care are exactly the same, or sometimes even more, for elective and cancer. And we have to understand that actually the challenges on the people that I sometimes end up working with, there isn't necessarily a connection between UEC, elective, cancer, and all those different, all working in isolation to each other. So I think, well, I can't affect all that. I can't influence all that. But what I can influence is urgent emergency care, but being aware, at least being aware that there are other things happening. I would love to walk into an organisation genuinely, and this is more of an organisational development piece of work around. There is absolutely clear sense of direction. There is maybe, as an organisation, there is 4 or 5 clear objectives rather than 40 that are often listed, trying to do everything all at once. But what I would say is that, what is our degree of influence, or what is our degree, what's in our control, and what is outside of our control? And sometimes we just have to bring it back to what can we do within that sphere, when we look around us and think, how do we even begin to affect all that, which then starts to distract us from what we're trying to do. So it's not, I haven't got the answer to that particular question, because it's an ongoing challenge. It is the utopia for me in terms of the direction of travel, that the organisation is really clear on that. But I think trying to reduce some of the noise helps us focus on what it is we're trying to achieve.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I think that's we've come to the end of the verbal questions. There's a few comments in the chat, and Vicky's put some links into a few TED Talks that you might want to have a look at after this meeting. The Simon Sinek one's really interesting, about the way he describes things, and starting with why. I think that's really important. So thank you very much, Nick, for leading this session for us, and thank you, Vicky, for organising it for us. When's the date of the next one? Have we all got it in our diaries?
So around, yeah, back end of February, I think it is. Same kind of, yeah, week. I'll share the slides with Vicky, and we can distribute them around if you want them.
Yeah, perfect.
And I'll just go back to the chat in a minute, and just if there's any questions in there, or comments,